She gave away her last meal, and that was the moment her old life ended. The rain came down in thin, icy sheets, turning the cracked pavement into a mirror of flickering streetlights as Emily Carter pulled her threadbare jacket tighter around her shoulders, her stomach aching with a dull, constant hunger that had become part of her routine. 12-hour shifts, 2 jobs, and still not enough to cover rent in a city that never noticed people like her. Her sneakers soaked through, her fingers numb, and in her hand, a small paper bag holding a $3 sandwich, the only thing she would eat all day. She had counted the coins twice before buying it, hesitated at the counter, almost walked away, but hunger had won. Barely, she stepped into the alley to escape the wind, just for a second, just to breathe. And that's when she saw him, a man sitting against the cold brick wall, clothes worn thin, posture slumped, like he had nowhere left to go. But something about him didn't fit, not the way he held himself, not the stillness, not the eyes that lifted slowly to meet hers, calm, focused, too aware. Emily froze. Her first instinct was to keep walking. People like her didn't have the luxury of helping others, not when they were one missed paycheck away from sleeping on the same concrete. Her grip tightened on the paper bag. Her stomach twisted harder, reminding her exactly how little she had. And yet, he didn't ask, didn't reach out, didn't even speak. He just watched her. And somehow that made it worse. The silence pressing against her chest, heavier than any plea could have been. I don't have much, she muttered, more to herself than to him. Her voice nearly lost in the rain. Her hand trembled as she opened the bag, the smell of cheap bread and deli meat rising faintly in the cold air. One bite could have made the difference between getting through the night and not. She knew that. She felt that. And still, she stepped forward, crouched down, and held it out. You can have it, she said, forcing the words past the tightness in her throat. For a second, nothing happened. The world seemed to pause. Even the rain felt quieter. And then he moved, slow, deliberate, his fingers brushing hers as he took the sandwich. His skin colder than it should have been, unnaturally so. Emily flinched without meaning to, her breath catching. And his eyes changed. Just for a fraction of a second, something ancient flickering beneath the surface, something she couldn't name. You shouldn't have done that, human, he said quietly, his voice smooth, controlled, but carrying a weight that made her heart skip. Emily blinked, confused, a strange unease creeping up her spine. It's just food, she replied, trying to shrug it off, trying to step back into something normal, something safe. But the air had shifted. She could feel it, like the entire alley was holding its breath. And then, headlights cut through the rain. One pair, then another, engines so quiet they barely made a sound as black SUVs rolled in from both ends of the street, sealing it off in seconds. Emily's pulse spiked, her instincts screaming that something was wrong, very wrong. Doors opened in perfect unison, figures stepped out, tall, composed, dressed in black, moving with a precision that didn't belong in her world. She stumbled back, her heel catching on uneven pavement, her eyes darting between them and the man she had just fed. And that's when everything broke. Every single one of them stopped and bowed, not to her, not to anyone else, but to him. Emily's breath left her in a sharp gasp as the man slowly rose to his feet, the weakness gone, replaced by something vast, something powerful, his posture straightening, his presence expanding until it filled every inch of the space, until it felt like gravity itself had shifted. The rain seemed to fall differently around him, softer, almost hesitant, and when he turned to look at her again, those pale eyes locked onto hers with a clarity that made her feel completely seen, completely exposed. Emily Carter, he said, her name rolling off his tongue like he had known it forever, and her heart stuttered. You gave me your last meal, he continued, his voice lower now, deeper, carrying something she couldn't escape. Do you understand what that means? Emily could not answer, not because she did not understand the words, but because the weight behind them pressed the air out of her lungs as she stood frozen in the middle of the rain-soaked alley, her heartbeat loud in her ears, her mind scrambling to catch up with what she was seeing, what she was hearing, what she was feeling. This was not possible. People did not bow like that, not in real life, not to someone who had been sitting on cold concrete just seconds ago. And yet every man in black remained perfectly still, heads lowered, waiting, as if the world itself paused for his command. I do not know what you mean, she managed, her voice unsteady, her fingers curling into her palms to stop the shaking. He watched her closely, too closely, as if every small movement meant something, as if he could read thoughts she had not even formed yet. And then he took a step forward, slow, deliberate, closing the distance between them until she could feel the cold radiating from him. Not the cold of weather, but something deeper, something older, something that did not belong to anything human. That meal, he said, his voice softer now, but somehow more dangerous, was not small, not in a world where everything has a price. Emily swallowed hard, her throat dry despite the rain. It was just kindness, she said, almost defensively, as if the word itself needed protection, as if it might be taken from her too. Something flickered in his expression then, brief, almost imperceptible, but it changed everything. The sharpness softened just enough to reveal something else beneath. Something unfamiliar to him. Kindness, he repeated, like he was testing the word, like it had not been spoken to him in a very long time. The silence stretched, filled only by the soft patter of rain against asphalt, until one of the men behind him shifted slightly, not enough to break formation, but enough to remind her that they were still there, still watching, still waiting. My king, one of them said carefully, his voice low, controlled. The council will be expecting your return. The man in front of her did not look away from Emily, not even for a second. They will wait, he replied simply, and something in the way he said it made it clear that waiting was not a suggestion. It was a certainty. Emily felt her pulse spike again. Council. King. None of this made sense. None of this fit into the world she knew. The world of rent payments and late shifts and cheap meals. I think you have the wrong person, she said quickly, instinctively stepping back, her heels slipping slightly on the wet pavement. I am nobody. I just work. I cannot be part of whatever this is. For a moment, she thought she saw something like amusement touch his lips. Not mocking, not cruel, but quiet, knowing. You say that, he said. And yet you gave away the only thing you had left. He gestured faintly toward her empty hands. People with nothing do not give. They hold on. They survive. They choose themselves. His gaze deepened, pulling her in. But you did not. Emily shook her head slightly, her breath uneven. I was just trying to help. She insisted, because that was the only truth she had, the only thing that still felt real. And that, he said, his voice lowering further, is exactly why you are not nobody. The words landed harder than she expected, not because they were loud, but because they were not, because they carried a quiet certainty that unsettled her more than anything else that had happened. The rain began to ease, the steady rhythm breaking into softer drops, as if even the storm was fading back, giving space to whatever this moment was becoming. One of the black cars idled nearby, its dark surface reflecting the distorted shapes of the alley, of the people, of her. Come with me, he said suddenly, the words simple, direct, but absolute. Emily blinked, her mind stalling again. What? She breathed. No, I cannot. I have work in the morning. I have rent. She stopped herself, because the list sounded small now, fragile, like it belonged to a life already slipping away. He tilted his head, slightly, studying her, as if weighing something unseen. You believe those things will remain unchanged after tonight, he said quietly. They will not. A chill ran through her, not from the air, but from the certainty in his voice, the way he spoke as if the future was already decided, already written. I do not take what is not offered, he continued, but I do not ignore what is given either. His hand lifted slightly, not reaching for her, not forcing, just there, open, waiting. So I will ask you once. His pale eyes held hers, steady, unyielding. Will you walk away from this moment and return to a life that will forget you? By morning, his voice dropped, softer, but far more dangerous. Or will you step into a world that will never let you be invisible again? Emily did not move, not at first, because something inside her resisted, something small but stubborn that had carried her through every long shift, every unpaid bill, every cold night where survival meant holding on to the little she understood. And this was not something she understood. Not even close. Her eyes flicked to his hand, still extended. Still waiting, not forcing, not demanding. Just there, as if the choice mattered more than anything else. Her chest tightened as she looked past him, at the line of black cars, at the men who had not moved an inch, at the street that suddenly felt too quiet, too empty, like the rest of the world had stepped back and left her alone in this moment. "If I say no," she said slowly, her voice steadier than she felt, "what happens?" The question hung between them, simple, but heavy with everything she could not see, everything she did not know. His gaze did not waver. "Then you walk away," he answered, calm, certain. "And your life continues exactly as it was." A pause, almost thoughtful. "Except it will not feel the same." Something in the way he said it made her stomach twist. Not fear exactly, but awareness, like standing on the edge of something and knowing you could never pretend you had not seen it. Emily let out a slow breath, her fingers relaxing slightly at her sides. "And if I say yes?" she asked, her voice quieter now, more cautious. His eyes seemed to sharpen, not with threat, but with focus, as if this was the answer he had been waiting for. "Then nothing in your life will remain the same," he said, and there was no hesitation in it, no softness to ease the weight of those words, just truth, clear and unfiltered. The rain had nearly stopped now, only a few drops falling from the edges of buildings. The air still cold, but no longer biting, and in that quiet, Emily became painfully aware of herself, of the way her clothes clung damply to her skin, of the ache in her stomach that had not gone away, of the life she had been about to return to, the early alarm, the long shift, the constant calculation of what she could afford and what she could not. It all felt so close, so real, and yet so small compared to what stood in front of her. She looked at him again, really looked this time, at the way he held himself, at the stillness in him that was not empty, but controlled, deliberate, powerful in a way she had never encountered before, and beneath it, something else, something quieter, something that had reacted when she gave him that sandwich, something that had not been there before. "You said you do not take what is not offered," she said slowly, her mind working through his words, trying to find something solid to hold on to. "So this is still my choice." "It is," he confirmed without hesitation. Emily nodded faintly, more to herself than to him, because that mattered. That one thing mattered more than she expected, that she was not being dragged into this, that she could still decide, even if she did not fully understand what she was deciding. Her heart pounded as she took a small step forward, then stopped again, doubt flickering, fear whispering that this was a mistake, that people like her did not step into unknown worlds and come out unchanged, that nothing good came without a cost. "Why me?" she asked suddenly, the question breaking through everything else. His expression shifted again, just slightly, as if the answer was both simple and complicated at the same time. "Because you gave without expecting," he said, "and in my world, that is not weakness." His gaze held hers, steady, unwavering. "It is power." The words settled into her, unexpected, unfamiliar, but not unwelcome. Emily let out a slow breath, her decision forming not all at once, but piece by piece, built from exhaustion, from curiosity, from something deeper she could not quite name, something that refused to turn away from what she had already seen. She reached out, her hand hesitant at first, then steadier as it moved closer to his. The moment her fingers brushed his, that same unnatural cold spread through her skin, but this time she did not pull back. This time she held on. His eyes flickered, just for a second, something unreadable passing through them, and then he closed his hand around hers, firm, certain, and everything shifted, not the street, not the cars, not the people, but something inside her, something quiet and irreversible. "Then come," he said, his voice low, controlled, but carrying something else now, something that felt almost like promise. He turned slightly, guiding her toward the nearest car. The men stepped aside instantly, creating a clear path without a single word. Emily walked beside him, her steps slower than his, but steady, her mind racing, her heart still pounding. And as she reached the car, as the door opened for her, without a sound, she hesitated one last time, glancing back at the alley, at the place where everything had changed, where she had been just another person passing through, invisible, unnoticed, and for the first time in her life, she realized she did not want to go back to that. Not anymore. Not after this. She turned back, met his gaze one more time, and stepped inside the door closed behind her with a soft, final sound that felt louder than anything else that night, sealing Emily inside a space that did not belong to her world. The interior of the car was silent, warm, impossibly clean, the faint scent of leather and something darker, something older, lingering in the air as she sat stiffly against the seat, her damp clothes clinging to her skin, her hands resting uncertainly in her lap. Across from her, he moved with the same quiet control, settling into his seat, as if this was all routine, as if moments like this happened every night. The door on his side closed just as softly, and within seconds, the car began to move, smooth, almost unreal, like it was gliding rather than driving. Emily's eyes flicked toward the tinted window, the city passing by in blurred streaks of light, familiar streets already starting to feel distant, unreachable. Her chest tightened slightly as the weight of what she had done settled in. She had stepped into this, chosen it, and now there was no simple way back. "You are quiet," he said after a moment, his voice cutting gently through the silence. Emily blinked, pulling her gaze away from the window. "I am thinking," she admitted, her voice softer now, less defensive, more honest. He watched her again, that same intense focus, as if her thoughts were something worth studying. "About what you have left behind," he said, not as a question, but as a statement. Emily nodded faintly. "About what I do not understand," she corrected, her fingers curling slightly as she spoke. "About you." The word lingered in the air between them, heavier than she expected. Something shifted in his expression again, subtle, controlled, but present. "Then ask," he said simply, leaning back slightly, his posture relaxed, but never careless, never unguarded. Emily hesitated, her mind filled with too many questions, none of them easy, none of them safe. "You called yourself a king," she began carefully, choosing her words with caution. "But kings do not sit in alleys," she finished, unsure if she had crossed a line she could not see. For a moment, there was silence, and then, to her surprise, the corner of his mouth lifted slightly, not quite a smile, but close. "No," he agreed. "They do not." His gaze drifted briefly toward the passing lights outside, his voice quieter now, more reflective. "But a king who wishes to understand what remains of humanity must sometimes step outside his throne." Emily frowned slightly, processing that. "So you were testing people," she said slowly, realization beginning to form. His eyes returned to hers, sharp again, focused. "I was observing," he corrected. "There is a difference." Emily let out a small breath, shaking her head slightly. "And you found nothing worth your time," she guessed, something in her tone sharper than before. Not angry, but honest. He did not answer immediately, and that silence told her more than words could have. The city lights reflected faintly in his pale eyes, but they did not warm them, did not change them. "Until you," he said finally, his voice low, steady. Emily's breath caught, not because of what he said, but because of how certain it sounded, how absolute. She shifted slightly in her seat, suddenly aware of the distance between them, and how small it felt in this enclosed space. "It was just food," she said again, quieter this time, as if repeating. "It might make everything simpler, more manageable." His gaze did not soften, but it changed, something deeper surfacing beneath the calm. "No," he said. "It was not." The car slowed slightly, turning onto a quieter street, the noise of the city fading further into the distance, replaced by something else, something more controlled, more deliberate. Emily felt it before she saw it. The shift in atmosphere, the sense that they were approaching something important, something that did not belong to the world she knew. She looked out the window again, and this time, what she saw made her breath still. Iron gates, tall, imposing, opening without hesitation as the car approached, revealing a long, winding drive lined with dim lights that stretched into the distance. The building beyond it was barely visible at first, a silhouette against the night, but as they moved closer, its details began to emerge, stone, dark, and elegant, towering in a way that felt less like architecture and more like presence. Emily's fingers tightened slightly against her knees, her heart picking up speed again. "Where are we?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper now, not out of fear, but out of something else, something like awe mixed with uncertainty. He followed her gaze, watching the structure as if it was nothing more than a familiar sight, something ordinary. "Home," he said, the word simple, but carrying a weight she could not ignore. Emily swallowed slowly, her reflection faint in the glass as the car came to a smooth stop, the gates closing silently behind them, sealing the world she knew outside. As the door beside her opened without a sound, cool night air brushing against her skin again, she did not move right away, her eyes still fixed on the place in front of her, the place she had just stepped into without truly understanding what it meant. And then his voice came again, softer this time, but no, less certain. "From this moment on," he said, "nothing in your life will be ordinary again." And somehow, she believed him. Emily stepped out slowly, her shoes touching the smooth stone driveway as the cool night air wrapped around her again. But it felt different now, quieter, heavier, like the space itself carried something unseen, something ancient that pressed gently against her senses. The car door closed behind her without a sound, and for a moment, she just stood there, looking up at the structure before her. The building was massive, far larger than anything she had ever stepped into, its dark stone walls rising into the night, windows glowing faintly with soft light, not harsh, not bright, but controlled, deliberate, like everything else about this place. Her breath slowed, not from calm, but from the quiet realization that she did not belong here, not in the way she had belonged to the city streets, not in the way she had blended into crowds and passed unnoticed. Here, she felt seen, even before anyone looked at her. "You are not expected to understand it yet." His voice came from beside her, steady, grounding, and when she turned, he was already moving forward, not waiting, not hesitating, as if the world would naturally follow him. And somehow it did. Emily hesitated for just a second, then followed, her steps softer, cautious, her eyes scanning everything, the wide stone steps, the tall doors that opened before they even reached them, revealing a grand interior that made her stop again, polished floors that reflected the soft light above, high ceilings that seemed to disappear into shadow, walls lined with details she could not fully process, not because they were overwhelming, but because they felt important. Like every inch of this place held meaning she did not yet understand. "Keep walking," he said quietly, not unkind, just certain, and she did, her footsteps echoing faintly as she moved beside him. Figures appeared at a distance, standing along the sides of the hall, not speaking, not moving, but watching, their presence controlled, disciplined, like the men from before, and as he passed, each one lowered their head slightly, a silent acknowledgement that followed him without question. Emily felt her chest tighten again, not fear, but awareness. This was real, all of it, not a moment, not a mistake, but a world she had stepped into without knowing the rules. "Do they all know who I am?" she asked quietly, her voice barely carrying in the vast space. He glanced at her briefly. "Not yet," he said, "but they will." Something in that answer made her pulse quicken again, not threat, but inevitability, like something had already been decided beyond her. They reached a wide staircase, the steps smooth and perfectly aligned, and without slowing, he continued upward. Emily followed, her legs slightly heavier now, not from exhaustion, but from the weight of everything settling in. At the top, the space opened into another hall, quieter, more private, the lights softer, the atmosphere more contained. He stopped in front of a door, turning to her fully for the first time since they had entered. "This is where you will stay," he said. Simple, direct. Emily blinked, her mind catching on the words, "stay," she repeated, unsure if she had heard correctly. "For how long?" He studied her for a moment, not dismissing the question, but not answering it immediately either. "As long as it takes," he said finally. And again, there was that certainty, that absence of doubt. Emily let out a slow breath, her thoughts racing. "And what exactly is it that you think I am supposed to do here?" she asked, a hint of resistance returning, something that reminded her of who she had been before. This moment, before all of this, his gaze did not harden, but it sharpened, focused. "You will remain," he said. You will observe, and you will learn. Emily frowned slightly. Learn what? She pressed, because she needed something solid, something clear. He stepped a little closer, not invading her space, but close enough that she could feel that same quiet, unnatural cold again. Why someone like you matters here, he said. His voice lower now, more deliberate, the words settling deeper than she expected. Emily opened her mouth to respond, but nothing came out, because she did not know how to answer that, did not know how to challenge something she did not understand. The door behind her opened softly, revealing a room beyond, warm light spilling out, inviting, but unfamiliar. She glanced inside briefly, catching glimpses of a space that looked more comfortable than anything she had known, and that alone made her uneasy. You will be safe here, he added, and the way he said it was not a promise meant to reassure. It was a statement of fact, something already decided. Emily looked back at him, searching for something, anything that felt human, something she could recognize, and for a brief second, she saw it again, that flicker, that quiet shift beneath the surface, the same one from the alley, the same one that had appeared when she handed him that meal. Why? She asked softly, the question slipping out before she could stop it. His expression stilled, completely, as if the answer mattered more than anything else she had asked so far. And when he spoke, his voice was quieter than ever before, but carried more weight than anything else he had said. Because you chose to give, when you had nothing. And somehow, that answer changed everything again. The door closed behind her with a quiet click that felt heavier than it should have, sealing Emily inside a space that did not belong to her past. She stood still for a moment, just inside the room, her fingers brushing lightly against the edge of the door, as if confirming it was real, as if she could still open it and walk back into everything she understood. But she did not move. The room was warm, softly lit by lamps that cast a gentle glow across polished wood and clean surfaces. The bed looked untouched, too perfect, too far removed from the thin mattress she was used to, and for a second, she felt out of place in a way she had never felt before, not invisible, not overlooked, but exposed, like she had been placed somewhere she was never meant to reach. She took a slow step forward, then another, her shoes barely making a sound against the floor. Everything here seemed to absorb noise, to soften it, to control it, just like everything else she had seen tonight. She let out a breath she did not realize she had been holding and moved toward the window, pulling the curtain slightly aside. The view stopped her again. The ground stretched far beyond what she expected, lights placed with precision along paths she could not fully see, the city nowhere in sight anymore, as if it had been completely cut off, like she had stepped into a world hidden just out of reach. Her reflection stared back at her faintly in the glass. Damp hair, tired eyes, clothes that did not belong in a place like this. And yet, here she was. This is not real, she whispered to herself, but the words did not hold, because everything felt too solid, too precise to be imagined. A soft sound behind her made her turn slightly, the door opening again, not abruptly, not forcefully, just enough for someone to step inside. She straightened instinctively, her posture shifting without thinking. A woman entered, composed, calm, dressed in dark, simple clothing that still carried an elegance Emily could not explain. Her movements were smooth, controlled, like she had done this 1,000 times. Miss Carter, the woman said, her voice steady, respectful, but distant. Emily blinked, caught off guard by the formality. You may call me Emily, she replied quietly, unsure of how else to respond. The woman inclined her head slightly, acknowledging but not changing her tone. You will be provided with clothing more suitable for this residence, she continued, stepping toward a neatly placed set of folded garments on a nearby chair. And anything you require will be arranged. Emily glanced at the clothes, then back at the woman, a small crease forming between her brows. I did not ask for any of this, she said, not harsh, but honest. The woman paused for a fraction of a second, then nodded once. No, she agreed, but it has been decided. Emily felt that again, that quiet pressure behind the words, that sense that decisions here did not work the way they did in her world. She crossed her arms lightly, more for comfort than defiance. And if I refuse? She asked, testing the edges of what she could say. The woman met her gaze evenly, not threatened, not surprised. "You are not a prisoner," she said calmly, "but you are under his protection." Emily exhaled slowly, her thoughts catching on that word again. Protection. It did not feel like safety in the way she knew it. It felt larger than that. Heavier. She turned slightly, pacing a few steps across the room, her fingers brushing the edge of a table, grounding herself in something physical, something real. "He said I am here to learn," she said after a moment, more to herself than to the woman. "Learn what exactly?" The woman's expression did not change, but something in her eyes sharpened slightly. "That is not something I am permitted to explain," she answered. "Only he will." Emily stopped, her shoulders tensing slightly, the lack of answers pressing in on her again. But before she could respond, the woman stepped back toward the door. "You should rest," she said, her tone softening just enough to be noticeable. "Tomorrow will not be what you expect." And with that, she left, the door closing quietly behind her once more. Emily stood there in the silence, the words lingering in the air. Tomorrow. She turned slowly, looking around the room again, at the bed, at the clothes, at everything that felt too far removed from the life she had known just hours ago. Her body felt heavy now, the exhaustion she had ignored finally catching up, but her mind refused to settle. Too many questions, too many unknowns. She moved to the bed cautiously, sitting on the edge as if it might disappear beneath her, her hands resting lightly on the fabric, soft, unfamiliar. And for the first time since stepping into this place, she allowed herself to feel it fully. The shift, the break between who she had been and where she was now. She lay back slowly, staring up at the ceiling, the quiet almost overwhelming. And just before her eyes closed, one thought settled clearly in her mind. Not fear, not regret, but something far more dangerous. Curiosity. Emily woke before the room fully adjusted to morning, her eyes opening slowly as if her mind had already been awake long before her body followed. The silence was the first thing she noticed, not the kind of silence she knew from early mornings in the city, where distant traffic and faint voices always lingered in the background, but something deeper, something complete. Like the world outside this place had been muted entirely. She stayed still for a moment, staring at the unfamiliar ceiling above her, letting the memory of the night return piece by piece. The alley, the rain, the man who was not a man, the choice she had made. Her chest rose slowly as she exhaled, grounding herself in the present, in the reality that she had not imagined any of it. She pushed herself up carefully, the bed shifting softly beneath her, and glanced around the room again. Everything exactly as she had left it, untouched, controlled, waiting. She swung her legs over the side, her feet touching the floor, steady, real. A quiet knock sounded at the door, precise, measured, not rushed. "Miss Carter." The same composed voice from the night before. Emily straightened instinctively. "You can come in," she said, her voice still carrying a trace of sleep. The door opened smoothly. The woman stepped inside once more, her posture unchanged, her expression calm. "Good morning," she said, and though the words were simple, they felt formal, intentional. Emily nodded slightly. "Good morning," she replied, standing fully now. The woman's gaze moved briefly over her, assessing, not critically, but efficiently. "You are expected downstairs," she continued. "He is waiting." Emily's stomach tightened at the words, not fear, but anticipation mixed with uncertainty. She glanced toward the folded clothes from the night before, still placed neatly where they had been left. "I will need a few minutes," she said, and the woman inclined her head. "Of course," before stepping back toward the door, leaving her alone once more. Emily moved toward the clothes slowly, her fingers brushing the fabric, softer than anything she owned. She hesitated for a moment, then changed, the new clothes fitting as if they had been made for her, the unfamiliar comfort almost unsettling. She caught her reflection in a mirror she had not noticed before, and for a second, she did not recognize herself. Not because she looked different, but because she looked like she belonged here, and that thought alone made her pulse quicken. She turned away quickly, pushing it aside, and moved toward the door, opening it carefully. The hallway beyond was quiet, just as controlled as everything else. The woman stood waiting, already prepared to lead her. Emily followed without a word, her steps steady but cautious. they moved through the corridors. Down the wide staircase she had seen the night before, the space now illuminated by soft daylight filtering through tall windows, revealing details she had missed, the textures, the depth, the precision of everything. It was not just grand, it was deliberate, every inch designed with purpose. Figures moved in the distance, staff, all composed, all aware, but none approached, none spoke, as if the entire place operated on an unspoken understanding. Emily's awareness sharpened with every step. This was not just a home, it was a system, a structure she did not yet understand. They reached a set of large doors, already open, revealing a vast room beyond, quieter than the rest, more contained. At the far end, he stood, exactly where her eyes were drawn the moment she entered, his presence filling the space without effort, dressed differently now, no longer the man from the alley, no longer the figure from the car, but something else entirely, something that matched this place, this world, his posture straight, controlled, his expression unreadable, and yet focused entirely on her. Emily slowed slightly as she approached, aware of every step, every breath. The woman beside her stopped just before the threshold, allowing her to continue alone, and for a brief second, Emily felt it again, that moment of choice. Even now, even here, she could turn back, she could step away, but she did not. She continued forward until she stood several feet from him. The distance, deliberate, measured. "You came," he said, his voice calm, but carrying that same weight she had felt from the beginning. Emily met his gaze, steadier now than before. "You said I had a choice," she replied, her voice quiet, but firm. Something in his expression shifted, not visibly, but enough that she felt it. "And you chose," he said, stepping slightly closer, not enough to close the distance, but enough to remind her of the presence he carried. "Now you will begin to understand what that choice means." Emily held his gaze, her pulse steady despite everything. "Then start explaining," she said, not demanding, but direct, because she had stepped into this, and she needed to know. He watched her for a moment longer, as if measuring something unseen, then turned slightly, gesturing toward the vast space around them. "This world," he said, his voice lower now, more deliberate, "does not run on kindness." He paused, letting the words settle. "And yet, you disrupted it." Emily frowned slightly, the weight of that statement settling deeper than she expected, and for the first time, she realized this was not just about what she had done, it was about what it had changed. Emily felt the weight of his words settle into the silence between them, not loud, not dramatic, but heavy in a way that made it impossible to ignore. She stood there, her gaze steady but her thoughts shifting rapidly, trying to understand what he meant, how something as simple as giving away a meal could possibly disrupt anything in a world like this. "I did not disrupt anything," she said finally, her voice calm but firm. "I just helped someone who needed it." His eyes held hers, unblinking, as if he had expected that answer. "That is exactly what makes it a disruption," he replied, his tone measured, controlled. "Because in this world, actions are never without purpose." He stepped closer, slow, deliberate, his presence filling the space without effort. Every gesture, every word, every exchange carries intention. Emily frowned slightly, her arms crossing loosely as she processed that. "And you think I had some hidden intention?" she asked, a hint of disbelief in her voice. He stopped just a few steps away, the distance between them now small enough that she could feel that familiar, unnatural stillness radiating from him. "No," he said, and for the first time, there was something unmistakable in his tone, something almost rare. "You had none." The words landed differently than she expected, not as an accusation, but as something closer to recognition. "That is why it matters," he continued, "because it does not exist here." Emily let out a quiet breath, shaking her head slightly. "Kindness exists everywhere," she said, but even as she spoke, the certainty in her voice weakened, because everything she had seen since arriving here suggested otherwise. The silence that followed was not empty. It was filled with something unspoken, something he was waiting for her to understand. He turned slightly, gesturing toward the vast room around them. "What you see here," he said, "is built on order, on control, on balance." His voice echoed faintly against the high walls. Nothing is given without reason, and nothing is taken without consequence. Emily's gaze followed his gesture, taking in the space again, but this time, she saw it differently, not just as something grand, but as something structured, precise, every detail intentional. So where do I fit into that? She asked, her voice quieter now, more thoughtful. He looked back at her, and for a moment, the intensity in his gaze softened just enough to reveal something else beneath, something more complex. That, he said, is what we are about to find out. The words sent a subtle chill through her, not fear, but awareness, like standing at the beginning of something she could not yet see the end of. A faint movement near the far end of the room drew her attention. Figures entering, their presence controlled, their posture formal. They did not speak, but their arrival shifted the atmosphere instantly, the air tightening slightly, as if something important was about to happen. Emily's eyes flicked back to him. Who are they? She asked, her voice low. He did not turn, did not acknowledge them immediately. The ones who maintain this world, he said, his tone calm. But there was something beneath it now, something sharper, more deliberate. And the ones who will question your presence in it. Emily felt her pulse pick up again, her awareness sharpening. She had known this moment would come, had felt it building since she stepped into this place. They do not know me, she said, almost to herself. No, he agreed, finally turning slightly, his gaze shifting briefly toward the approaching figures before returning to her. And they will not understand you. The words were not comforting, but they were honest, and somehow, that steadied her more than anything else could have. Emily straightened slightly, her shoulders settling into a quiet resolve she had not fully realized was there. Then let them ask, she said, her voice calm, but firm. His eyes lingered on her for a moment longer, and something in his expression changed again, subtle, but undeniable, not surprise, not approval, but something close to acknowledgement. They will do more than ask, he said quietly. They will observe, they will test, and they will decide whether you belong here. Emily's breath slowed, her focus sharpening as the figures came closer, their presence now clear, defined. And what if they decide I do not? She asked, her voice steady despite the question. He held her gaze, unflinching. Then they will be wrong, he said, simply, and the certainty in those words settled around her, like something solid, something unshakable. And for the first time since stepping into this world, Emily realized something she had not expected. She was not standing here alone. The room shifted the moment they stepped closer, not in sound, not in movement, but in presence, the kind that pressed subtly against the air and made every breath feel measured. Emily stood her ground, her gaze steady even as the figures approached, each of them composed, dressed in dark formal attire that carried the same quiet authority she had begun to recognize. Their steps were synchronized without effort, their eyes sharp, observant, and when they finally stopped several feet away, the silence stretched, deliberate, controlled, as if waiting for something unspoken to begin. One of them stepped forward slightly, not breaking formation, but clearly leading, his expression neutral, but his eyes calculating. You bring a human into this place, he said, his voice calm, but carrying an edge that was impossible to ignore. Without explanation, Emily felt the weight of those words shift toward her, not directly, but enough to make it clear she was the subject, not the speaker. Beside her, he did not move, did not react in any visible way, but something in the air around him sharpened, subtle, but unmistakable. I do not require permission, he replied, his tone even, controlled, but carrying a finality that settled over the room instantly. The man did not step back, but his posture adjusted slightly, acknowledging without conceding. This is not about permission, he said. It is about balance. Emily's fingers tightened slightly at her sides, her awareness heightened as she listened, trying to understand a conversation that felt larger than anything she had ever been part of. Balance is not disrupted by one act, he responded, his gaze unwavering. The man's eyes shifted briefly to Emily, studying her, measuring something she could not see. That depends on the act, he said, and this time, his attention did not leave her, and the intention behind it. Emily met his gaze, her instinct telling her not to look away, not here, not now. even as the scrutiny pressed against her. "There was no intention," she said, her voice calm, clear, the truth steady in her chest despite everything around her. A flicker of something passed through the man's expression. Not quite disbelief, not quite acceptance, but interest. "That is precisely the problem," he replied, turning his attention back to the one beside her. Uncontrolled variables do not belong in a system built on order. The silence that followed was heavier than before, but this time, it did not feel uncertain. It felt decided. "She remains," he said, the words simple, but carrying a weight that left no room for argument. The man held his gaze for a moment longer, then inclined his head slightly, not in agreement, but in acknowledgement. "Then she will be evaluated," he said, stepping back into place. The tension in the room shifted again, not gone, but redirected, contained. Emily let out a slow breath she had not realized she was holding, her focus returning to the moment, to the reality of where she stood, and what had just happened. She turned her head slightly, her voice lower now, but steady. "That is what this is," she said, more statement than question. "A test." He looked at her, and for the first time since they entered this room, there was no distance in his gaze, no barrier, just clarity. "Everything here is a test," he said. "The difference is, you were not meant to be part of it." The words settled into her, not as a warning, but as a truth she could not ignore. Emily straightened slightly, her shoulders steady, her thoughts sharper now than they had been since the moment she stepped into this world. "Then maybe that is the point," she said quietly, and something shifted again, not in the room, but between them, something unspoken, something that had begun the moment she handed him that meal. He studied her for a long second, and then, slowly, almost imperceptibly, he nodded once, not as a command, not as an order, but as recognition. "Then we will see," he said, turning slightly as the figures behind him began to disperse, their presence fading back into the structure of the room, but not disappearing entirely. Emily watched them go, her awareness still heightened, her place here still uncertain, but no longer fragile. She was not invisible anymore, not here, not in this world. And as she stood there, in the center of something she did not yet understand, one truth settled clearly in her mind. She had given something small, but it had awakened something far greater. And whatever came next would not be simple.